We're faced with a crisis, but we have leaders missing in action. Because some leaders have become a liability. And leaders have become a pain. So we are beginning to say, how do we succeed despite our leaders?
Please put your hands together for Dr. Somadoda Fikeni.
Program Director, Mr. Ndoro, the keynote speaker of today who has made my work even more difficult, a hard act to follow, a brother, a friend, Dr. Padili Hotla, the family of Luthuli and the Luthuli Museum leadership, the university which is hosting us, represented by one of the figures who have become so common on our TV sets during the era of the pandemic, the Consular General, the partner from UNISA. I won't mention each and everybody, but those I have not mentioned are the ones who are most important. I rise on the protocols which have been used before. I just want to reflect and extract a few things. Obviously, this lecture is quite vast and extensive. I just want to extract a few things to complement what has been said. The first one, we are in a deep, unprecedented crisis as a country, at least since our transition to democracy. But when you are faced with a crisis, you have an option of paralysis and despair. But at the same time, a crisis creates opportunities for clearing the minds collectively to look for solutions. Many countries like Japan, Germany were reduced to the ground during the Second World War. But look where they are today. Because they looked at the window of crisis and asked themselves, what must we do differently to set on a new course? Look at Rwanda today. It was going on a genocide as we were going to elections. It lost 1 million people. But still, like Maya Angelou once said, they rose from the ashes and the dust. So I want to start from that moment by saying, bad a crisis might be, it is what we do with the moment presented by a crisis, collectively and individually. South Africa has seen in the last 110 more years, or since the Union of South Africa, 3 moments of crisis. When segregation came in and whites decided to form the union to the exclusion of blacks, and the Native Land Act was imminent. Men and women of unparalleled vision converged in Bloemfontein to respond to that crisis. The African Native Congress was formed, which is today the ANC. It was to define the trajectory of history, the struggle, for a long time. That was a response to a crisis. Again in the 50s, when there was a crisis of leadership and apartheid was consolidating, this time they chose Chief Albert Luthuli to lead. And it was during that time that again leaders converged in Kliptown, the Congress of the People, to define new horizons. The Freedom Charter came out. These are two moments when, faced with a crisis, leaders converged. They did not wallow in the valley of despair. They defined a new path. The third moment, when in the late 80s, it was clear that the country had reached a stalemate, we could sink into a civil war, which was more destructive. Leaders gathered again in Kempton Park to define a new society, to produce and give birth to the new South Africa, the new constitutional democracy. And that's leadership. But today we are faced with a crisis. And we have this kairos moment, which in Greek means the right moment, the season of harvest. But where are the leaders? Who are the leaders? And how are leaders appointed or elected or self-appointed? We're faced with a crisis, but we have leaders missing in action. Therefore, when leaders continue to fail, aren't we legitimately expected to ask ourselves, how can we survive the infliction by our leaders? Because some leaders have become a liability. And leaders have become a pain. So we are beginning to say, how do we succeed despite our leaders? In 2012, there was a crisis. Leaders rose and they stood to be counted. In 1955, there was a crisis. Leaders rose to be counted. In early 1990s, there was a crisis. Leaders rose. But this time around, a considerable number of leaders decided to be part of the problem, a liability to our common purpose and destiny. As I stand next to this symbolic shadow of Luthuli, an epitome of leadership, and as I reflect to what Dr. Padili Hotla was saying, it's clear that we have a crisis of leadership. But who will tell the leaders that we have such a crisis? Because it looks like they do not even believe they are such a crisis. Every indicator, the Afrobarometer has said, the legitimacy crisis, the non-participation in the elections shows the crisis in the political class, the crisis, but somehow the leaders seem to be so alienated from this reality. Who will whisper to them that they've become part of the problem? But the second part, which I think is very important and exciting, is when you raise the name of Umamunogu Kanya. When parents give birth to any child, the name is a vision statement and a prophecy of the family, the one who brings light. This is actually a very important work that the chair of Albert Luthuli should be reflecting on. These leaders we revere. Who are their partners? And what role have they been playing? Because there are surely wings beneath the wings of these leaders, but they are always in the shadows. Many people didn't know that there was no Kutela Dube, and yet her life was so vital. We know King Shaka, but less is known about Mkawai. We know little about Nonesi, and we know little about Albertina Sisulu. We know little about Bangliswa. We may know a little bit, but less about Mandantis, the chieftains, because our history is his story, and there is no her story. Even our history is widowed, as you had said. So as I conclude, what are we to do with the schizophrenic personality of a South African leadership? They can talk through about ethics, values, about principles and morality, and do something different, and feel no discomfort in these contradictions. A leader can speak in a full audience about fighting corruption, whilst a handler is waiting in the lobby to discuss corruption after the meeting. That's the paradox of credibility, of believability of our leaders today. But then, for a moment, let's examine how leaders rise The moment the threshold to leadership is so low that anyone who believes I will fail in the professional world, I'll fail in the business world, let me try politics, and they become leaders and they direct all those who have succeeded in those professions, what do you think you are going to expect? The moment such people who have never had any chance of success are told you are going to be removed from the list and they start killing each other, what did you expect? Perhaps as we try to change this, the mistake we've made is to think that each generation will have plenty supply of the Lutulis. Each generation will have plenty supply of the Mandelas. And therefore we're looking for messiahs even under the tables and unlikely places. What if you are the leaders you've been waiting for? I think each one of us, as we confront these challenges, we must have the mindset of David when he was confronted by a giant Goliath. It was fight or flight. He looked at this giant. He could have said, how can I beat this giant with a sling and a stone? But he had a different mindset of courage, where he said, how can I miss such a big target? Perhaps that is the time, and that time has come. So we must therefore know that leadership is practiced not much in the words as in the attitude and in actions, as Harold Genan once said. Let my people go. You'll remember that the biblical story of Moses, when he stretched out that stick to say, let my people go from the Pharaohs. Those words ring through when you see unemployment of the youth, when you see gender-based violence, when you see political killings, when you see load shedding, when you see poverty, you say, let my people go. Indeed, they were allowed to go and cross the Red Sea. The journey, it is said, biblical scholars say it would have taken 8 days, but it ended up taking 40 years. And along the way, people went through great suffering. They turned against each other. The commandments were produced as an intervention. Maybe we are in that time between times. We are not where we were in 1994, but we are not where we intended to be. We've taken a detour. We are stuck in the mud. When you are being prepared for a greater mission, when a clay pot is being prepared, it is sometimes subjected to the extreme heat for it to be stronger. So as Martin Luther King Jr. once said, even though we may face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. Even out of this crisis, Even when widows have betrayed the legacy of the husband, the metaphoric widows that Ndateli Hotla was talking about, I still have that dream. When Luthuli died on that fateful day of July 1967, they thought he was being buried, but little did they know that he was a seed that would multiply even from his deadened state. But the key question I leave you with: should we wait for his organization to recover from its coma, or should we salvage his values to live and outlive even his organization? He was taken to the mountain top. He looked over. He saw the promised land, but he was not to get to the promised land because it was expected of us, the Joshuas of today, to finish the race. Thank you.
Professor